Hi, I'm Kristen Lyons, and this is my response to question number 2. How have development and measurement influenced the work of today's educational and school psychologists? Knowledge is acquired through observation. In order to make sense of these observations, the collected data must be quantified. Duncan believes that the roots of measurement are based in social processes. All measurement is social measurement. Physical measures are made for social purposes. Duncan continues that the history of physics can be traced to ancient people trying to solve practical social problems. Psychometrics is for measuring psychological and social phenomena. In psychometrics, the measurement procedure used is the questionnaire, and the variables of interest are part of the broader theoretical framework. In the late 1660s and early 1670s, Isaac Newton was the first to use an average of multiple observations, but he did not document that he used averages for decades. During that time, errors in measurement were seen as moral failing. Carl Pearson, regarded as the founder of statistics, developed mathematical tools that were needed to systematically examine relationships among variables. Charles Spearman set the stage for the subsequent development and popularization of factor analysis in the early 20th century. Many of the early contributors to formal measurement, such as Alfred Binet, were interested in intellectual abilities, so much of the early psychometrics was applied to mental testing. S.S. Stevens is credited with classifying measures into nominal, ordinal, interval, and ratio scales. Not only did L.L. Thurston develop the mathematical foundations of factor analysis, but he is also credited with applying psychophysical methods to the scaling of the stimuli, which is the convergence of the two historical roots. Narins and Luce's work on the fundamental properties of measures has established the scientific legitimacy of the types of measurement procedures used in the social sciences. Lord and Novak's work, Statistical Theories of Mental Test Scores, summarized the collective knowledge in the area of ability testing and was the first cogent descriptions of what has become known as item response theory. In the early 1880s, Emil Kraepelin argued for more scientific classification of psychiatric illnesses, but because of his lack of access to tools, his nosological categories were still largely description. From the early 1880s to present day, many have pushed for a reconceptualization of the diagnosis of mental illnesses that was more in line with empirical work, such as modern measurement approaches. It's important to understand the origin of scales and how this development impacts educational and school psychologists. From my readings in earlier times, it seems that psychology had a difficult time being considered a true science because of the lack and ability to measure the mind. Duncan believes that the roots of measurement are in social processes. Therefore, measurements were developed to help solve or understand social problems. Error does exist in measurement. Understanding the existence of error is crucial for educational and school psychologists. No test result is the be-all, end-all. That's why school psychologists always administer several measures in order to determine a diagnosis and recommendation. Measurement is a fundamental activity of science which makes observed data quantifiable. With the addition of sound measurement scales, psychology has progressed to having a scientific foundation. Educational psychologists and school psychologists use measures in all aspects of their research. Without measurement, there would be no research-based quantifiable evidence to back up the consistency of their observations. Paula Muller said that Kraepelin's systems of mental diseases has contributed substantially to the foundation of modern psychiatric diagnosis in the DSM-5 and the ICD-10. During Kraepelin's time, his nosology was a major target of criticism. Nosology is the systematic classification of diseases. The main criticism of this time was over individual items in his classification system. From 1929 to present, Kraepelin received positive reactions and was considered with high professional esteem. Early critics argued against the whole concept of nosology, and contemporary critics argue against the autonomous classification, but none of the critics ever offered alternative options for psychiatric classification. Bumke was one who once warned against Kraepelin's work, now stated that only Kraepelin's system of predefined illnesses allowed a distinction between the overlapping of manic depressive and schizophrenic disorder. Schneider considered Kraepelin's work as the basis of modern diagnostics. Kahn called Kraepelin the master builder of psychiatry. His categorical structure still influences diagnosis and prognosis today. Palm and Moeller state Kraepelin established a system with a variety of flaws, but it was a simple and clinically applicable system that allowed distinct diagnosis instead of only syndromal description. Kraepelin's work remains in use not because of superiority, but because of simplicity. Kraepelin is an important figure in measurement because he moved away from the mental illness labels of the times and developed his systems for mental diseases. Kraepelin's systems of mental diseases has helped educational psychologists and school psychologists have a basis to operate from with the DSM-5. In 2011, Alfred Binet was officially acknowledged as France's best-known psychologist. Binet's research in the 1890s focused on suggestibility, or the unconscious influence of the experimenter. Through this technique, he was able to study children and adolescents and found that these participants' memories could be influenced by simple suggestions. Binet also studied the group conformity effect. He would randomly group children in order to observe group dynamics. He found three central phenomena: a division of roles naturally occurred, an increase in suggestibility, and a tendency to imitate one another. Ash used Binet's techniques and showed that subjects would frequently conform to group judgment. Throughout the 1890s, Binet began on the path toward intelligence testing by studying individual difference with Victor Henry. Binet and Henry found that the greatest differences between individuals were found in higher mental processes. The 1911 scale became the definitive test of intelligence, the Binet-Simon test. He believed the introduction of scientific research into pedagogy is indispensable for improving teaching methods and perfecting the art of aptitude testing among indispensable children. He also believed that it would be better to focus on psychological and physiological nature of each child. In order to do this, teaching strategies must be modified in order to enhance all the qualities of an individual. Before the work of Binet, there was no way to measure intelligence. He decided to go in a different route in regards to individual difference by examining higher mental processes instead of examining sensation or perception. With the development of the Binet-Simon test, educational psychologists have been able to use this measurement tool in order to help the development of intelligence. This test was created to be simple, quick, precise, and varied. School psychologists are able to administer this particular test and obtain scores sooner in order to help a student have the best education possible. Even though this test was created in 1911, it's still relevant today and one of the main measures in a school psychologist's repertoire. Kupperman states Lee J. Cronbach is one of the most prominent and influential educational psychologists of all time. Since the turn of the 20th century, testing has been extremely important in the American public education system. Most educational decisions rely on the results of test scores. Kupperman says Cronbach's contributions included both improvements to the technology of psychometric modeling and reformulations that went beyond the mathematics to understand the psychology of test performance. Test scores are comprised of factors that relate both directly and indirectly to the educational process. Cronbach realized that the factors that were completely irrelevant to the evaluation of the outcomes of learning could distort interpretations of test results if ignored. Kupperman states Cronbach's work on reliability and later on generalizability had an enormous impact on the field of educational measurement. Cronbach's ideas brought educational psychology considerations into psychometric work. Will students have the same performance on different occasions, with different test forms, with different item forms? This theory helped demonstrate that validity was the most important consideration for evaluating soundness of information extracted from test scores. Educational psychology is indebted to Cronbach for his efforts to align the scientific process with social research. He believed that we should design instruction to fit groups of students, not to fit the average person, and that different forms of instruction should be matched to different types of learners. Educational psychologists have benefited from Cronbach's quest for a better explanation of learning in response to instruction. Cronbach sharpened the sensitivity of educational research to the way different learners cope with the demands and affordances embedded in different learning environments. He advocated for local field studies and field methods, helped refine research questions to seek to understand person-situation interactions in educational settings, and emphasized context as essential to improve interpretation in the educational process. Cronbach's ideas of individualized measurement have helped educational psychologists take testing data and analyze how it applies to the individual and how instruction can be adapted. School psychologists are able to take the same testing information, analyze the results, and apply the analysis to an individual's specific learning objectives and determine if modifications are needed. The influence of Cronbach is evident in the work of educational and school psychologists. Thank you.